We have been studying quadratic functions in standard form. Today you're going to look at quadratic functions written in vertex form. Standard form, remember, is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. This form tells us two things. First, a, which is the coefficient of my x squared term, tells you whether your parabola opens up or down. If a is less than 0, it opens down. This means that a is a negative number. You'll get a frown. If a is greater than 0, that means that the parabola is going to open up, which means you're going to get a smile. The second thing that this equation tells us is that c, which is your constant term, that's the term without the variable, tells you the y-intercept where the parabola crosses the y-axis. Remember, the y-intercept, x is equal to 0. So when we look at vertex form, there are certain things that a, h, and k means. So let's look at this form. First of all, it tells us this term right here, which is my a term, tells me that the parabola is going to open up or down. If it opens up, that means that a is positive, which means that a is greater than 0. If it opens down, a is negative, which means that a is less than 0. The second thing that this form tells us is that h gives you the axis of symmetry. X is equal to h. The axis of symmetry, which is this red line, tells me the point at which these two are going to be the same. So whatever's on the right side is going to be on the left side. So it divides that parabola into two equal pieces. The third thing, it gives you the vertex or tip of the parabola, which is labeled as some h comma k. H is my x coordinate and k is my y coordinate. Let's look at this form more in detail. So if we look at this problem, f of x is equal to 3 times the quantity of x minus 1 squared plus 2. We want to find 3 characteristics that are in this form. The first one is we want to identify the vertex h comma k of the quadratic function. If you look at the original form, h is the number inside of the parentheses, and k is the number on the outside. Notice that between the x and the h, there's a minus. And then notice that between the parentheses and the k is a plus. Those two things are very important because it determines the sign of your vertex. And since in my function I have a minus 1, the h is going to be positive 1. Since I see a plus 2, my k is going to be positive 2. So the vertex of this parabola is 1, 2. What is the axis of symmetry? The axis of symmetry is a line that divides the parabola into 2 equal pieces. So therefore, my axis of symmetry is written in the form of x is equal to h. H is the x coordinate of my vertex, which is 1. So therefore, my axis of symmetry is x is equal to 1. The last characteristic that I want to answer is, does it open up or down? How do you know? Well, now we want to look at that number in front of my parentheses, which is my a. A is 3, which means that 3 is greater than 0. And since 3 is greater than 0, this parabola is going to open up. Another equation or function that we can look at is f of x is equal to -5 times the quantity of x minus 2 squared minus 4. Now here again, we want to identify those three characteristics in this form. First, we want to identify the vertex h comma k of the quadratic function. Look inside the parentheses. H is 2. And since there's a minus in the irregular form and minus is still in the function, my x coordinate or my h is going to be positive 2. Now if you look on the outside, the original form says it's plus k. But now I have a minus k, which is a minus 4. So since that term is minus, then my k is going to end up to be -4. So the vertex of my parabola is 2, -4. What is the axis of symmetry? Remember, the axis of symmetry is h. H is positive 2. And since we write it in the form of x is equal to h, then I'm going to substitute 2 back in the place of h, and my axis of symmetry is x is equal to 2. Does it open up or down? How do you know? Well, the a coefficient, which is -5, determines this. So since -5 is less than 0, this parabola is going to open down. Now here we have another quadratic function or quadratic equation, which means that we can determine those three things again. Notice that a is missing. Anytime that happens, a is always going to be 1. So let's look at those three parts. We want to identify the vertex h comma k of the quadratic function. Notice that in the original form, I see a minus h. But down here, there's a plus 6. Well, how did that happen? Well, now we have to remember that a negative times a negative is a positive. So therefore, in order for this to be plus 6, my h has to be -6. On the outside here again, we see our k, which is plus k. And down here we still see a plus 1. And since my operation is still plus, then my coefficient, or excuse me, my k coordinate or my y coordinate is going to be 1. So the vertex of this parabola is -6, 1. What is the axis of symmetry? Here again, the axis of symmetry is my h, or the x coordinate of the vertex, written in the form of x is equal to h. H is -6. So I'm going to take that, put it back in the place of h in the equation, and so therefore my axis of symmetry is x is equal to -6. Does it open up or down? How do you know? Well, a is equal to 1. And since 1 is greater than 0, this parabola is going to open up. Let's look at an example where A is a negative number, but this time the number is missing. So therefore, if there is no number there, it's always understood to be a 1 there. So therefore, my A is -1. Identify the vertex h comma k of the quadratic function. Well, inside the parentheses, remember the original form is a -h. But down here in the equation or the function that I've given you, it's +3. So anytime there's a plus inside of the parentheses, that h is going to be a negative number, and in this case it's -3. On the outside, notice that we are supposed to have plus k. But down here it's a -9. So anytime that happens, now my k is going to be a negative number, and in this case it's -9. So the vertex of this parabola is -3, -9. What is the axis of symmetry? The axis of symmetry is written in the form of x is equal to h. H is my x-coordinate. My x-coordinate of my vertex is -3. So I'm going to replace the h with -3. So my axis of symmetry is x is equal to -3. Does it open up or down? How do you know? Well, notice that my a term, which is the number in front of the parentheses, is -1. And since -1 is less than 0, then this parabola is going to open down. Please make sure you go back and you review this video and the examples that I've given you. Notice when h is negative and when k is positive, when h is positive, when k is negative, and you have to make sure you're determining the correct signs. Once you've reviewed this video over and over again and you got it, go to your assignment and complete the problems. Have a good day.